Why does the moon have so many different faces when our constant companion is known as always presenting just one? Since time immemorial, such adventures and speculations about the hidden reverse side of this have been associated with it. That is exciting, but now researchers may have turned a corner in solving the tantalizing mysteries of the moon. That is because, as we now know, the South Pole Aitken Basin contains a surprising secret underground. This makes sense, assuming that a giant structure lies hidden on the satellite's invisible side, which is either a terrific source of information on the turbulent history of the celestial body, or helps explain the vast disparity between the two halves of the moon. For thousands of years, unsolved mystery. What today takes just a few clicks of the mouse. We are now in a comfortable situation where we can now marvel at the far side of the moon from our living room couch, but our ancestors had no way of looking beyond the dark side of our faithful companion. The fact is just that the moon has a bound rotation and so always takes the same side of itself toward us. But never in detail, however, was the celestial body so shy about its side. After all, speaking factually, the satellite may have even started to spin faster once it was formed, but was so slowed down over time by the Earth's gravitational pull that its speed of rotation approached its orbital speed. But because there are so few eyewitnesses from this long-ago lunar era, humanity did not see the mysterious far side of the moon until October 7, 1959, when Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 disclosed it to the world for the first time ever. Chang'e 4 was the first space probe to land on the dark side of the moon, 6 years after that. Although literally put not as dark as it's most commonly believed. In effect, the side of the moon which is looking away from the Earth goes through exactly the same lunar phases as does the side that appears in the sky each night, but in the reverse order. Instead, the far side of the moon, on average, is more reflective than the near side, which is to say that the hidden side is brighter at new moon than the visible side at full moon. The reason for it is the different composition of the two halves of the moon. The problem in this example is that the word halves is not quite right here. The moon's orbit is tilted 5 degrees and its shape is elliptical, but only 41% of the moon's surface is visible from Earth. But they're enough to know that the front side of our satellite is dotted with dark spots bigger than they are numerous. In turn, these are so-called maria, lowlands, covered with solidified lava, structures which are much less common on the other side. While the far side of the moon also has less lunar mountains and craters, and for decades, researchers have struggled to understand why it has significantly fewer. And while this is the exciting part, experts now believe all of this time they have finally solved the mystery of the different lunar hemispheres, and the reason why rests in a deep, deep lunar structure that is hidden. And according to these experts, they have just discovered gigantic structure to the far side of the moon. Hawaii is the ultimate travel destination, whatever a vacationer's spice level may be. It's no wonder due to the fact that the main island is anonymous. The main island, which is over 10,400 square kilometers in size, and which has fabulous black sand beaches and one of the biggest active volcanoes in the world, Mauna Loa. So why? Does an extraordinary discovery on the far side of the moon have anything to do with a paradisiacal vacation island in the Pacific? Well, the answer is surprising, and Peter B. James of Baylor University in Texas sums it up as follows. Picture a pile of metal 5 times larger than the main island of Hawaii and bury it underground. But that's about the unexpected mass that we discovered, Schneider says. Call the spaceship a pile of metal, and some people will picture a monstrous alien spacecraft that fell into the moon's surface. But it isn't exactly like that. First, let's visualize where the unexpected mass is coming from. It's not just any place, it's the South Pole Aitken Basin, the largest preserved impact crater in the entire solar system. With a stretch of more than 2,000 kilometers, this is no doubt a violent cosmic crash that still exists today. There is no question. However, whilst this is much more questionable, We don't know exactly how the brutal impact took place an estimated 4.3 billion years ago, and what effects this must have had on the continued evolution of what was still a very young moon. 80. The same time, Peter James's team analyzed data from the Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory (GRAIL) mission in an effort to get closer to solving this exciting mystery and to explore nature of the subsurface at the south pole of the Moon. 2 space probes were set on course for the Moon in September 2011 to study its gravitational field and anomalies, and to provide useful new insights into the internal structure of our satellite. That means the data from the GRAIL mission was combined with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, whose mission has been to map the entire lunar surface in high resolution since 2009, as James's research team should in the end be able to identify a huge mass anomaly underneath the South Pole Aitken Basin. Note, however, that we're talking about a structure that is a staggering 200 kilometers deep, which has become customary in the past 2 pages, like a very large mole, and that is very deep, and weighs in at a whopping 2.8 x 10^18 quadrillion tons. B. Comparison. The mass of the entire Earth's atmosphere is somewhere on the order of 515 quadrillion tons. What on earth is concealed in our view of the invisible intelligences of the surface of the Moon? And that probably depends on who you ask. The more alternative-minded think we might be dealing with a hidden base of an unknown lunar civilization, but the conservative experts take a more natural approach. What's more, this is the metal core of the asteroid which would have formed the giant impact basin in the distant past. That's not a fuzzy approach. It's a computer simulation that revealed a theoretical iron-nickel core would impact the upper mantle of the Moon deeply enough to create a depression, but not plunge all the way into the core of the heavenly body. Even in this scenario, the thrust of the asteroid's core pulling down on the bottom of the crater can almost pull the bottom of the crater a kilometer deeper into the ground. So far, so plausible. However, it should be noted that a second theory is also being bandied about by the experts in that regard. Less founded on an asteroid core, this is an enormous clumped buildup of dense oxides that once cohered together at Moon's south pole during the original formation of the magma ocean as it solidified. Have we figured out Moon's hemispheres? Which theory is ultimately correct has yet to be shown by future research. But in the case of the relic of an impact, that actually could be useful to us for figuring out why the 2 sides of the Moon seem so different. Finally, we also now know that the crust on the near side of the Moon is much less than the crust on its far side, and that the maria were much less evenly distributed. However, in the same breath we also find a crust on the Earth's face that is quite radioactive because it has unusually high enrichments in radioactive thorium, potassium, phosphorus, and rare Earth elements. The problem is just as nebulous as the question of how this so-called creep terrain materialized in the first place, and how that fueled the lunar volcanism. Differences can be traced back to the tidal forces of the Earth. That's one of them. Brown University's Matt Jones and his colleagues who studied the effect the gigantic heat of impact released at the lunar south pole had on the whole thing. Interestingly, the opposite region, called the creep terrain, is almost exactly the South Pole Aitken Basin. It may therefore be that we are in fact facing a coincidence which isn't a coincidence at all. In turn, subsequent reconstruction of the impact was based on geophysical models of the early lunar interior, and in the end this presented something remarkable. The collision would have indeed generated an anomaly in the lunar mantle, which strongly shaped the Moon's interior, developing in the Duishuger Xiantu hundreds of millions of years. The details of the collision with, say, a giant asteroid about 100 kilometers in size set off an enormous heat downburst that radiated through the Moon's interior to the other side. It also did this to the region that is now famous for its many maria and its creep terrain. How a surfer is swept along by a wave. This process ensured that accumulations of titanium-rich magmas were transported to the side facing the Earth. The extraordinary creep enrichment and basal-rich rock of the Maria were sufficiently explained by the heat released and the mantle convection resulting from the simulation. But it also happened to trigger volcanism and help mold the Moon's Maria themselves in the first place. Perhaps the event focused the heat-producing elements on the near side of the Moon. The interaction of radioactive heating with enhanced mantle convection may have literally simmered the upper mantle near side over millions of years. Huge eruptions were thus made possible by the way the hot magma was able to find its way to the surface. The first eruptions, experts say, happened 200 million years after the asteroid impact. But the most intense phase of the Maria volcanism only kicked in 300 to 500 million years later. In the end, the South Pole Aitken Basin and the nature of the Moon's front side were apparently directly linked, and one of the greatest lunar mysteries of all time may be over for good. We also hope that we won't make clicking through any longer, so subscribe button in a few moments. Join our community for now and never miss another new video from us. We'll see you soon.